Sacha Coles and John Choi, thank you so much for making the time to come in. And thank you for your support of the studio. These guys have been incredibly supportive of me getting this up and going and providing us with information and drawings, etc., etc. So thank you.
David or
Okay, thanks for the opportunity, Tasha. Great to be able to present this to you. It's the first sort of public forum that we've been able to present what we're doing on the UPN, so happy to be able to do it here. And it's also pretty exciting to see the model which is in progress out there. You're already in some ways maybe a few steps ahead of us, so we'll see how we go. What this is essentially a presentation we've given a couple of weeks ago to our client, the SHFA board, for endorsement. And where we are in terms of, if we just flick through, we'll go through, probably a lot of this you've already covered. These first several slides for briefing the board. So we might fly through these, and if you want any more information afterwards on this, we're happy to give you that. But essentially, this is a bit of background. It talks about what the UPN, the site that we're dealing with is actually called, and that's the UPN Stage 2 up there on that diagram. Obviously, this 500 metre long by roughly 20 metre wide site should be considered in its totality, but in terms of our brief, in terms of aspect of Choi Rophia Fighera, we are looking at the darker red UPN Stage 2 in there. Next. The site as it is, you know that. I guess we can flick through. This is Stage 1 we're looking at here. Next. And Stage 2, which is really the focus of our commission. Next. I guess these are some briefing notes here which are really, I suppose, aspirational points that were part of our brief that we responded to. The key things for the state and the significance of this project are listed up there, but of course it has to be a pedestrian and cycle network coming through there and connecting really ideally central all the way through to Darling Harbour in a kind of an intuitive way and a very easy way to move through there. It has to be a destination with a series of events or experiences along its length. Sustainability is critical. There are opportunities for educational, recreational interaction, of course, with cultures like this. SIT and UTS are key stakeholders in this, of course, along with the powerhouse.
So what's SIT?
Sorry, the TAFE.
TAFE.
So combined, your population day to day has been given to us at about 80,000. So that's a big catchment of people right on the doorstep of the UPN. So other things there, obviously safe and friendly. There's some commercial element to it. Our brief, and John will talk about this later, our brief talked about the opportunity for a small retail opportunity on the UPN, more like one of the the project that was just presented to you, the greenhouse. Accessibility is fundamental. This has to be DDA compliant. And innovation, of course, and history and the way we interpret that has to underpin what we do. Okay, next. So where we are in our process is that we've just gone to community consultation, which is kind of somewhere between phase 1 and phase 2. We're developing a concept, and then we'll go to DA. We'll look for consent for our work, and then we'll go through the documentation process and hope that this is completed at the same time that the Chowchak Wing building is, the ribbons cut on that will be at the same time that the UPN.
We have to.
Yeah, we have to. Okay. Yep, sorry. Yeah. This is an interesting slide because it talks about land use and stakeholders. So the red line here is what we're contracted to deliver, essentially, but there's a kind of a zone of influence, if you like, around that site. So the red line is UPN Stage 2. The kind of greeny aqua colour is powerhouse land down through there. So the Harwood building sits as a pretty important, potent building in the middle of that. So yeah, thanks, John. City of Sydney own this little piece of land here, which is Mary Ann Street, and that has a particularly important potential, I suppose, as the gateway and the door to the new Gary building, the business school.
So for everyone, the Gary building's going in here. That's the Chowchak building, right? It's alternatively, it hasn't got a settled name yet, does it? The Chow building, the Chow Wing, the Gary building.
Chowchak Wing is the name.
Okay.
Yeah. The yellow, which is just down through here, is SHFA land as well, outside of our contract, but it's part of that zone of influence that we have to consider. That's where it drops away the 4 metres to Darling Drive. And this piece of infrastructure here is owned by, who knows, someone in the state. Someone
trying to find out.
You're trying to find out, you really don't know.
It's under the sort of custodial ownership of SHFA. They maintain it, so essentially in government, I think that means that they own it. And there's another little piece down through here, which is Transgrid owned, and it actually continues down through here. So that's another stakeholder, important stakeholder that we have to negotiate with. Okay, next. So the site, this puts it in context a little bit more, but just to orient you, I mean, you've got the model out there and you should know that pretty well by now, but Psychic, which is the big 20-hectare site you've just been hearing about, is a fundamental urban renewal project in a way for the city, but also for our site. It's the northern termination of the UPN as to where it is at the moment. The other key buildings, of course, are the Powerhouse and the Harwood building, which is where 97% of its exhibition content is in the basement of that building. Only 3% of that is ever shown at one time. Chachak Wing building, which will fundamentally bring, I suppose, the eyes of the world to this part in a way that I guess we hope this will do, but this one's already in train. New development for on top of the Transgrid building, commercial buildings, some retail down the bottom, Citygate Hotel, some ideas, and obviously they should be explored thoroughly about how that could interact on the ground plane to the UPN. And of course UTS buildings, SIT, TAFE owns this building down through here, Wembley House, ABC. So it's an incredibly potent mix. Oh, sorry, John.
No, I'll just add a few more things. I mean, if you look at this, it's really, one of the quite telling things is the intensity of cultural education and technology institutions that face onto UPN. It's quite rare for a city to sort of have all of these institutions essentially share a public realm, potentially share a public realm. The other thing that's interesting, and it is interesting, is unlike, let's say, the High Line or a lot of other rail corridors, there might be a lot more mix between residential and general office, etc., to these institutions. There's actually quite a dominance of institutions that have a relationship to UPN directly. And then sort of flanking that, you have an area that is changing quite radically with the CTIF, but also Fraserside and the work that's happening at UTS as well. And then sort of outside of that immediate zone, you have quite incredible kind of communities, the Chinatown communities, amazing sort of density of both residents as well as sort of commercial activities that go on there, as well as sort of residents of Piedmont and things. And there's some data showing the level of, I guess, what they put sort of people in creative economies. There's a high density of that in this area. So it's really a sort of melting pot for this project to hopefully start to help catalyse how this whole sort of quarter can transform over the next, I guess, 10 years. And that's why the studio, I think, is really exciting for us. And one of the things that when we started on the project wasn't so much, well, let's make a beautiful doormat for Gary's building, was really this more broader regional role that this corridor can have, and that's the sort of exciting thing about this studio. Yeah. Next.
I can probably flick through that. Thank you. All right, so how are we approaching it? I think the next 10 or so slides talk about our key principles that we established in order to get into the site and try and understand how we might approach it. Okay, next, thanks Tasha. The first one obviously is, like any first approach I think to an urban design brief, is connectivity, and in particular this one's been set up, in brief to us was about connecting A to B, and we obviously think that there's a greater potential, as we've just been talking about, for multiple connections to be made across this site. The primary one is north-south, which comes from the Devonshire Tunnel down to Darling Harbour, but there's a whole range of more interesting, I suppose, and even more valuable connections east-west, such as the movement from this campus and SIT again back down into Chinatown and back down into Darling Harbour. So north-south is obviously a fundamental driver, but the east-west has been completely underplayed and separated by the grade change of the UPN down through here. So one of the things we're trying to show in this diagram is that it's not only about this kind of local connectivity, but it's more at a city scale and probably regional, if you want to say, or district. So we've drawn down to Crown Street in the bottom right of this image down through here, is where we actually see that the way topography works, and as I'm sure you know, with Sydney, a whole series of finger ridge lines and ridge streets, Harris Street being one of those, being a key ridge street all the way down to the water at the end of Piermont. And all of it's no coincidence then that all of these cultural institutions line Harris Street being one of these great ridge streets. But what happens then, of course, is the topography falls away dramatically down into the valley floor, which is Darling Harbour, and then shooting out into the harbour itself. So ridge line, and grid, and we're saying that you can connect down Devonshire Street underneath the tunnel, so be up in Surrey Hills and then be down at Darling Harbour with a very intuitive connection once you get down into the tunnel, pop out here, come along the UPN, and then ideally through the Sick Heap development, come in intuitively straight down to Darling Harbour. But there's also these east-west connections which are these, which have formerly been cut off. The UPN sits almost at the shoulder. So you have the ridge up here, the UPN, then you have the valley floor, and there's been this disjunct between all of this folding down to the UPN, the grade change of about 3 metres just to get up to it, and then you have to fold down again. So what we're trying to do is to re-stitch those opportunities to come in east-west.
Yeah, just talk a little bit more. That stepping thing is also working to UPN strength because it plugs directly into Railway Square underneath the sort of intersection into here, into Central Station and the bus interchange there. So the RL of the UPN is quite an effective RL to facilitate sort of pooling boom patterns in that area into a core transport interchange. I think the other thing about this corridor, looking at this plan, is majority of SHFA's land obviously sits on that valley, and it's always been problematic in terms of how you stitch that back into the city. But fortunately, with this project, which sits within the SHFA thing, it's one where there's a natural sort of way that can facilitate linking back into the city. So unlike kind of perhaps other developments, which just by the nature of the site are more kind of isolated, independent and difficult to connect, this is much more about restitching and connecting into existing sort of the city pattern as such.
Okay, so one of the first things we wanted to explore here was what is the history of the site and how can we leverage that and create a kind of a narrative, if you like, or a story for everything that we're doing on the site. And that's really recognising the industrial history of the site, its development from rail and wheat and wealth to sort of create city making, essentially, to something which is now about innovation and ideas. And again, the institutions which sit along the edge of this spine are those which deal with a knowledge economy rather than a kind of a former industrial economy, which was about city building and steel. So if we go to the next slide. And our opportunity, and the thing that we find interesting here, is how do we interpret that change in what we do on the ground, in this figure, in this site. You jump in if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just say a little bit more about that. One of, when we started to talk to all the different stakeholders, what was interesting was that all the key institutions, such as UTS, Powerhouse, they all have a sort of background from their era of industrial economy. And they've all sort of made a transition into the knowledge and creative economy. And even TAFE, they were very sort of keen to tell us we don't just do trade apprenticeships anymore. You know, we do fashion design, we do graphic design, we do digital fabrication. We're very much sort of part of the new economy. And so there's this thing that the corridor has had a really strong infrastructural role in our economy and our culture in the past, and it still does have that, and that can be strengthened, but it really has already kind of evolved from that industrial to the new kind of social and creative role that it has.
So while the rail is of great interest to us as a story of its past, and it's still meaningful, we're really seeing the opportunity for social infrastructure, and we'll talk a bit more about that to be the most dominant thing, I guess, on the corridor. Yep. And so what that means is, for us, I think it's critically important that this thing reads. What the UPN becomes is a figure in its own right. So an identity is a ground-plane intervention. So it's not just about the programming, the soft programming that sits on top, but it's also about the architecture of it and the design of this thing. So it has to, again, be a movement spine. So it has to, of course, connect the north to the south and east to west. But along that, we see the opportunity of creating these events or experiences which we call event platforms. And that's telling, or giving the opportunity for a whole range of rich experiences to happen. The next slide probably talks about this idea of social infrastructure. So it may be in the bottom right, very, very simple in its most simple form, opportunities like that, free to create, if you like, pop-up interventions, but using the grade change and using opportunities of these citywide connections to bring people together. And obviously the bottom left one of John's office's interventions at Times Square, which many of you know. The Highline, two great examples of doing that, which are about pausing along these movement corridors. The top left one there is about ensuring that it's not just a path which is kind of rudimentarily connecting A to B for pedestrians and cyclists, but it has, unfortunately that image is cut off, but what's nice about it is the detailing of the concrete elements there actually shift up from the ground plane and become the benches, which become the retaining wall. So it's sort of one continued element, I mean, there's a kind of beauty in the industrial material there. Yep. Movement. This diagram really just says there's a lot of back doors on the UPN right now. Our principal opportunity here is to turn those into front doors. The Chow Chak Wing building will be one of those. It has two entrances. It has one on Mary Ann Street, which is probably the primary address for the building. But in terms of how many people will use this day to day and the movement patterns that will be established, it's this high-level connection here across the Heritage Bridge, which will get the most movements, one would imagine, just because of its ease of movement from the rest of the campus down through this building, down onto the UPN, and then through. There's a whole range of, there's only one which is really used well at the moment, and that's the ABC, which I'm sure you guys probably use maybe daily, I'm not sure, but that's a great hybrid connection there, which is essentially just one little door which provides the main conduit on ground to Harris Street, and where are the other opportunities for that to happen? To invite people into form a public space and break down a private space and break down these walls so that the UPN actually continues into these buildings which front it.
Event platforms. So as Sash mentioned, that's a key part of the project. It was really interesting hearing the SHFA presentation before. Is that those institutions that we had communication with. The other sort of thing that we're replicating stories amongst all of them is they want to break out of their silos of their own institution, and they want to engage, collaborate with other institutions, and have engaged with the city very much in a public way, if possible. So we really saw the UPN as a great platform to have those sort of interactions take place. Hence we've established in our thinking that it's essentially not only a movement path, but an opportunity of various different kinds of social engagement that could occur along the length of it. So these are some overlay things that could happen on those activities, on the platform things. And interpretation, interpretation is sort of fundamental to the concept. It's not a tack-on idea. As we explained, the basis of the whole, the drive and the design is from trying to tell that narrative of this transformation, but still sort of retaining a kind of infrastructure role. It's just the kind of infrastructure that's evolved. And secondly, as Sash said, that's told by the new figure that overlays onto it. So even as we conceive how that might work on UPN stage 1, where you have the asphalt, etc., really sort of almost conceive you could break up that asphalt, sort of leave it as it is, let some of the sort of ecology rehabitate into that, and then these new social infrastructure overlay on that. so there are some traditional interpretive things we see there's opportunity for. There's retention as much of the original heritage fabric, including the rail lines. There's a culvert there. There's this heritage signal box and other items that are along the corridor. There isn't a lot, but there's some beautiful industrial fabric that face onto it. So combined, we're looking to retain that as well as the remnant ecology that's there. So we're not the sort of landscape ideas aren't so much a very formal introducing. It's really sort of re-curating the industrial ecology that's there at the moment. Thanks. Interaction.
I think we've talked a little bit about this, but along the length of it, the main opportunity here is to bring people together in a range of different ways, and I think some of them are immediate and fast and free. So the bottom right is Darling Quarter as an example there, just simple infrastructure elements like table tennis, ping pong, all of these things which might be exercise. But the top right, which is about how do we stretch this beyond our immediate catchments, which is UTS, SIT, Powerhouse, ABC, etc. along the length, and create some opportunity for a greater community input here. There was a concept which was out there in the media about an urban farm, city farm. This was one of two places which was sort of mooted as having an opportunity to have a city farm there. We don't see the one. It wasn't a SHFA idea. It wasn't on, and it was proposed for SHFA land, so there was already a bit of a disjunct with that. But we see the opportunity of having something which does give the social benefit of having community gardens on the site without giving the whole site over to that. So, and also it provides an opportunity for other user groups to inhabit the site at different times. So it might not be 9 to 5, but it might be more evenings and weekends that the local communities can engage with the site. So, yeah.
So one of to facilitate some of the events, we saw an opportunity to have a permanent infrastructure that facilitates that. And one of a better word, we call it space transporters. And rather than a traditional function room, we're looking at a more innovative precedents that sort of blur the realm between pop-up events, sort of permanent infrastructure, public realm and internal space, and those things such as the storefront and Kunai BMW lab, which will be presented. Next. The material overlay, so you can get a feel for some of the things that inspired us. We'll just go on to show you.
Well, I think just quickly on that, one of the things that we're interested in is repurposing the materials which are there, and not trying to bring an overlay of two precious materials to this thing which has a terrain vague quality to it. The garden elements that John mentioned before, we talked about them as being Derek Jarman gardens, which are, many of you know his work, but you can look it up and see what we're thinking about. But using the materials of this site to create garden spaces, which maybe on the bottom right you can see the delicacy in the very fine grain, the detail of it, which is there. But also there's a robustness to the concrete and the ballast and all of these materials which we want to use.
Sustainability. So that other than I guess general best practice, such as water sensitive urban design, using low energy fittings, etc. One of the things innovation we're trying to do is to prefabricate as much of this public domain as possible. So this figure element is a precast concrete panel, and again we like that idea for multiple reasons. One, it repurposes what's had a history as a very pragmatic, traditional sort of warehouse tilt-up panels, etc., to have a different role in this case as a ground plane, but also tuned so it's actually one piece that's doing the structure as well as the seating, as well as the edging, as well as the pavement. And the other thing that's quite critical, because the time frame for this project is really tight, we're really needing to, it will help facilitate that sort of pace of installation that could occur to the project. So again, you can see the dynamic between the two materialities that we have in mind. Next. So we have a couple of options. You probably only present the first one option.
Okay, so this view is a view from looking past the Chowchak Wing building, looking north, up to the powerhouse, up to the elevated rail bridge. Up to the elevated pedestrian connection to the new Psykeep site. We're sitting pretty much over the Heritage Bridge at the beginning of the UPN Stage 2. Next. So as part of our brief, it's probably not critical to this but we have had to come up with two options. That's mainly borne by cost. So essentially one is premium and one is the everyday or the business as usual model. And that business as usual model might be an extension of what's already there as part of the UPN stage 1. So rolling that out. It works. You can get from A to B, you can ride a bike down it, you can walk down it. It may be pretty unsafe at the moment, but it's still a connector. So the base option would have been that. Thanks. So what we're going to do is just take you through from south to north, and we've, just for communication purposes more than anything, we've broken it down into three parts. One is the Business School Square, as we call it. Two, Marianne Square at the end of Marianne Street. And three, the Transformer. Okay, the Business School Square is really the new forecourt entry into the business school. So just to give you an idea about levels here, I'm sure you've built the model, you know the levels, but we're sitting at about RL 9.5 at the bridge, and then the street below is about RL 4. So there's at least 5 metres of elevation at that point. The bridge is a heritage item. It'll be structurally remade but retained on site. What happens is we're looking for as many opportunities as possible, sorry John, to get up to this level. So we're proposing near a bit of transgrid land here that there's a stair connection back up directly into the Chowchak wing building. And this will be one plane which comes along and then slightly elevates to the glazing line through here, and ideally the materials might extend even into the building.
Yeah. And there's an opportunity in the future to connect into the UTS library connection there.
Yep. Over to building 5, is that correct? Over Darling Drive?
Yeah.
One of the major things that you'll see on the site, and which we have, we've retained, of course, is the fig trees. The volume of those, if that was to be a building on the site, would be the largest building by far. So they have an incredible presence on the site, and we think that obviously we need to work with that and retain those. What we've got here is some elevated turf areas where the precast pavement shifts up and becomes almost like a little chill-out space, I suppose, at the beginning of the building down through here. But further to that, these precast panels shift and stretch over the retaining wall, which drops away 4 to 5 metres down to Darling Drive and becomes a series of study pods which are cantilevered out underneath the canopy of the trees in a way like this image here. They'll be wireless spaces which can be used for study and just retreat amongst the canopy of the trees.
The whole corridor, we hope, will be a free Wi-Fi zone. This is one of the things we've noticed is really can activate and change the dynamic of the space too.
So the view, looking down from here, past the Harwood building, this little, rebate of land which comes down here, which is the access that Transgrid needs to get into their substations down through here. The forecourt, some opportunity to craft some large, generous furniture at the entry of that, and there will be a little, the plans are for a little cafe to spill out down through here. These pods, which you can see underneath here, and they're retained trees. We're looking north, but one of the great things that this site offers is relatively low buildings on the west, nothing on the north, and so incredible solar aspect to here. So the simple things about sitting in sun on turf under a tree, they're things which are not hard to deliver for this, but are of kind of unquantifiable importance, I think, day to day. Marianne Square, and this is probably where we've extended our remit a little bit. When we first looked at this, we saw a great opportunity for, obviously, this incredible new building down through here where it hits the ground. What are the opportunities for that to extend north? And this is down low where Marianne Street comes down, hits an RL, I can't remember what it is, but it's 3 metres different, so it's probably about 5 to 8 up here. That's about the level change we're dealing with. And we saw this great opportunity to make something of that level change in the same way perhaps that the tickets booth does that, in terms of creating opportunities for kind of social infrastructure. So to take up that grade change with seat steps, stairs, and then beyond that to create another level of seating, which is again underneath the canopy of the trees. But what that does, it sets up this prospect back down to, more importantly, an opportunity to create a new public space for Sydney down here. Have the powerhouse, Chow Chak Wing, what connects these two things should be a fantastic public space which gets great light, is a similar scale to Customs House. And in terms of what it is, it's paved, could be bollarded, a very simple space which gives opportunities, I think you'll see in the next image, for occupation of that grade change at its edge. Did you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, look, I just wanted to say one of the things that really compelled us about that idea was the corridor itself is only 25 metres wide. So in terms of, we can facilitate sort of small to medium scale gatherings, but anything that's at the larger city scale, it's really the corridor can't sustain, which I think is a good thing too, because we have a lot of great, powerhouse, not other institutions, but this is an open public space opportunity between the powerhouse building and BTS. We just thought, well, that's got to be it. You've got to put it there. So.
This might be one of your conversation points about the city. But if we just go back quickly, this is, sorry Tasha, just one. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep, this is not our site. We've sort of extended our brief down through here, and we did pitch this in the most optimistic way to the powerhouse about making the square this, so it goes from building to building. And of course, we think that that's a great opportunity. There's a master planning process which Powerhouse are yet to go through, so we've taken all of our people outside of that boundary and we put them here. So it's still powerful, still good, but we'll see what happens in this space.
Peter Morton's sitting up the back. He's from the Powerhouse. He's going to speak to us a little bit later. He's still have something to say about that.
Okay, next. I guess what you can see in this image as well is leading north, and we'll talk about that next to the transformer up through here. But I think you can start to see how level changes facilitate opportunities rather than just limits to access and movement.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just talking to this one. This obviously shows an event in outdoor cinema mode, but the different kind of levels and things occurring here, and the half platform, etc. There's a level of indeterminacy to this zone that gives a little bit more openness about how you might structure the events or overlay or sort of occupation of that space. So that's another thing we had in mind, is that there's opportunities that's very clear, very sort of clear in terms of what it welcomes you to in terms of design. But there's also indeterminate moments where it is more open, I guess, to interpretation of how you might occupy and use the space. Yeah. So the transformer we spoke about earlier sits on this northern end of it, between the Harvard building and Darling Drive. Next. So from this image, it occurs at a point where the axis shifts. So one of the things in the short term is the CKIP development is occurring kind of down the track. So this project will be open before that's activated. So past the Gary building, there's currently there'll be less incentive to go further north into this. There's not natural sort of movement patterns, etc., other than if you're wanting to go to Darling Drive. So we really wanted to put something there that will kind of invite people to come down and use this. And we're hoping the kind of intensity of activity that might occur in the Gary building might precipitate a desire to sort of get away and sort of have a calm moment further on the north end of it. It also sits at the cross-axis between the ramps and disabled access ramps that are occurring to the left here and down the right of it. And the whole transformer structure is essentially a roof frame and a utility object. And it also sits on a platform that's raised, giving you a sense of sort of coming up for that prospect with soft landscape around it. So, as you can see, it's very simple. The rail structure is an infrastructure that will hold a range of things that allows it to adapt. So it will hold general sort of lighting, power, data, AV, but it will also, in terms of how the space can be transformed, there'll be retractable shade elements and roof elements, as well as a metal mesh that goes around. You can see that. And it's divided into 3 zones, which gives a range of flexibility, how much you might be able to use it. Next. So in our brief, where the project's at is we have sign-off in terms of this design as a general concept, or a brief concept, if you like. Because the original brief was really just for a simple toilet block and a kiosk for the project, and we really felt that the UPN corridor, with the ambitions that are latent in the brief, and as well as what we saw as an opportunity, that it could have something larger than that. So that was, kind of like the beefed up version of the kiosk and toilet. But if they spend some extra money on the overlay components that allows it to change, and this was just trying to show you, it may appear the same, but the overlay components can radically change the different ways that they could operate. So this could be a small outdoor lecture set up here. This could be a small party with a sort of a back of house area. This could be a very formal structured event where you spatially enclose the whole mesh, and at night time, particularly with the mesh and lighting, that can completely change the sort of reading of what that space provides. With a big sort of dining setup and a full kitchen that might be able to be set up in the back of house to the sort of varying different modes there. Next.
Okay, we might flick through this, and if you want to go to the very end, Tasha, if you can just keep going. We don't want to talk about this. We probably do want to talk about that one. This might be our final slide, which is a view looking south, back to the Devonshire Tunnel at the very end, past the Harwood, past the Chachak Wing Building. And I guess one of the most interesting things for us is, yes, the project is an incredible opportunity to do something which has longevity and is enduring and is uplifting as a space, but it's also the other things which will happen after we leave the room, which is the curation of it, is the placemaking of this. They're the real opportunities which I think are going to bring sustained life to this place. And this image talks about what we're in control of, what we can control, I suppose, as part of our brief. And these markets, these night markets, which might be the young blood markets, which spill out onto the UPN, we're trying to elicit opportunities to come, speculation. So that's really your role now to take that up. This is what we can deal with down through here, and we can provide spaces where these things can happen over time. But the most interesting things will happen when all of these institutions come together as a kind of, in a governance model which allows for events, happenings, radical things that we can't plan for as part of our scope, but we can leave space for. So that's really what this image seeks to leave you with, I think. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. They're such incredibly evocative images, aren't they? They're so seductive.